There we go. All right. Depending on where you are, good morning or good afternoon. And thank you for attending today. This is the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics seminar series. And today we have a special guest, John Oliver Engler. And before we get started, just want to highlight a couple things. In the chat box, you'll see the U.S. Society our YouTube page. That's where you can find the recordings for all our seminars. We have social media, which is newish to us, I suppose, Facebook and a new Instagram account. You'll also find the link to our upcoming conference. There'll be a virtual component for those of you who are interested and might be far away and not able to attend. But that'll be June 6th through June 9th. And you'll also see the next two events in our series. We have started a honorary fellows fellowship. And the next one will be Herman Daly, and he will be brought into the fold by, I'm going blank for a second, by Josh Farley, sorry. So Josh Farley will introduce him as an honorary fellow, and we will also have our second book club, which will be The Value of a Whale, and that will be on April 23rd. So we hope you'll be able to attend our next events. Today, as I said, we're very happy to have Oliver Engler, professor of bioeconomy and resource efficiency at the University of Vechta, hopefully somewhat close. And he will be presenting his research on 15 years of degrowth and a systematic review. So with that, I will turn it over to Oliver. We'll hold the questions and comments to the end. We'll have plenty of time for that. And just ask everybody to please mute yourself. So with that, thank you, Oliver.
So hello, I hope everybody can hear me. Hello from my side. So thank you for having me, John. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So nice these things are possible in times of video conferences and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's get started. So hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
Yes.
And let's just get this thing to the full screen. There you go. Okay, so this research is titled 15 Years of Degrowth, the Systematic Review. And this is really a joint effort. It's really been a lot of work. This paper's been quite the ride. As you can imagine, there's lots of research published. You have to read all that. You have to sort of systematize it. So thank you to all my co-authors, in particular Max Kretschmer. It all started with his bachelor thesis, actually, that was co-supervised by Thomas Hood. And also thank you to my other colleagues who were also very helpful, which are Joe Arment, which used to be at University of Leeds, but is now at University of Vermont. Thomas Hood, who is retired professor of economics at Leuphana University, and Henrik van Werden, who is professor of methods at Leuphana. You can find this research, it's just been published under this shorthand. So let's get to the structure of today's talk. Let me just get this thing out of the way here. Okay. So it's pretty classic. I want to quickly say a few things about the motivation for this research and basically flesh out the contributions that this paper makes. Obviously, we're using quite a lot of different methods. So I need to talk a little bit about what methods we used and what data we had, what data set. Then obviously, a large part will be the results section. And then I'm going to try and talk about I call it key insights and conclusions, because really, I mean, there's so many results and you can say so many things. I really just want to give you a few key insights and some wrap up in the end. So yeah, let's get to the motivation for this. Really, when you look at the term degrowth, it's really interesting because up until a few years ago, there really wasn't a definition, I would say. It was more like descriptions were out there. For example, it was referred to as a social movement that found its way into academic discourse by De Maria et al. Going back to Latouche, 1986, Martinez Ayer and colleagues refer to degrowth as a political slogan with theoretical implications, which is quite interesting because to me, this is lacking sort of the practical, but we'll get to that. The same paper, Martinez Ayer and colleagues also refer to degrowth as an umbrella term rather than a mature concept or theory. And the first one to really come up with a real definition rather than a description is Jason Hickel in his really helpful article on what is degrowth. So he referred to degrowth or defined it as a planned reduction of energy and resource use in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. And we sort of really, you can, and yeah, a defining characteristic of all that is that the status quo is questioned, so the status quo of the economy and the way we do our business, we live, but the radicality of the questioning really varies a lot. And this has also been said by Konrad Ott already in 2012. So we basically start from this definition by Hickel. And if you look at the definition, really two things stand out, at least for me or for us. There's really two central economic questions. So one is reducing inequality, apart from obviously doing this thing, planned reduction of energy and resource use, is really two things. That's central economic questions, really. So one is about reducing inequality. So this would be distribution and redistribution, actually. And the other one is about money, because there is a thing called the monetary growth imperative, which assumes that the monetary system itself, forces us to make the economy grow ever more. So basically, one would expect that there is really a lot going on in terms of policy proposals on distribution and monetary policy. So basically, we have two contributions in this work. One is really a more quantitative exercise, which is subsumable under bibliometric and statistical full-text analysis of the degrowth literature, and I'm going to define in a moment what we mean by that. And the second contribution really is a qualitative analysis of the distributional and monetary policy proposals that are brought forward in that literature in particular. Those are basically the two main contributions. And let's take a look at the methods and the data that we use. So how do we go about this? There's different ways you can do it, and different reviews have been published, some of which also very good. We did it this way. So these were our inclusion criteria. We queried the Scopus database. You could have also used Web of Science or Web of Knowledge. That's, from experience, not such a great difference. And we queried it for a couple of keywords, namely degrowth, different writings, and post-growth in abstract titling keywords. We made the requirement that it should be English language peer-reviewed journal articles. So no things such as books or conference proceedings or white papers, stuff like that. Publication date between January 2008 and December 2022. And we really limited to subject areas: environmental sciences, business and economics, and social sciences. There's a couple of reasons for this. I just want to walk you through the most important ones. The main reason to take in this approach is the reduction of false positives. For example, if you don't do the limitation here to these subject areas, and you just leave it open, you have lots of hits from ecology or medicine that are about bacterial growth or tissue degrowth and that kind of stuff. And that's obviously not what we want. The date really is, it's grounded in the first International Scientific Degrowth Conference, which took place back in 2008. And whenever there's a conference on a special topic, then you can sort of think of that something as being established. And the main reason really for taking this approach of using English language peer-reviewed journal articles is really the publication culture in economics and also industrial or ecology in general as well. Really, if you want to, we all know that as economists or ecological economists, you really need to do these peer-reviewed journal articles, and books just don't count as much. So if you really want to, be part of the debate, the academic debate, you need to publish in a peer-reviewed journal article, and it better be in English because that's just the international language of English, of science or research. So that's basically the main reasons for taking this approach. There's also a couple of exclusion criteria. For example, so you have a couple of hits, right, with this this method that I just described, and then you will quickly see that lots of these hits will sort of use degrowth or post-growth as a buzzword, even just as a keyword, a random keyword, without actually discussing anything degrowth or post-growth related. Another thing that can happen is that degrowth or post-growth really are just a minor focus or a side aspect of the publication. For example, somebody writes in a conclusion that this, whatever he or she talked about, could be interesting for degrowth or post-growth. And then it's also mentioned in the keywords. But then that's really just, a minor focus and not really, the publication is not really about degrowth. So that's also an inclusion criteria for us. So this is what the process then looked like. We basically found 951 positives. Sorry. We had to exclude based on these exclusion criteria, roughly half of them. So the screening means based on the abstract, right? So based on just the abstract, we had to exclude 437. Then we went to the full paper assessment, 514. There's always usually a smaller fraction that you have to exclude based on the full paper assessment. In this case, it was 39 papers. And everything that was left, we included in the multivariate statistical full text analysis. But for the qualitative part, we excluded 19 because a subset of those papers that met all the inclusion criteria and passed all the exclusion criteria was just really not talking about any concrete policy proposals or even degrowth scenario in general. It was really abstract, philosophy stuff. So we excluded that beforehand, before we actually went to the qualitative stuff. So that's a small step from here to there, but yeah, that's how that, came about. So yeah, what do we do? Basically, we did a mixed method content analysis. So if you're familiar with that, mixed method basically means you combine qualitative and quantitative. And so there's two parts. For the quantitative part, we basically did a so-called multivariate statistical full text analysis of all paper PDFs. So what that does is basically it's taken an analysis that's pretty common in ecology and uses it for papers. So in ecology, something that you frequently do is you go around and you count species, right? And then based on how often a species occurs, you sort of delineate different habitats or biomes, right? So we're doing that here, but instead of species, and we're looking for paper habitats, right? So basically, we're clustering papers based on their conceptual vocabulary, based on the assumption that if a paper or two papers use a similar conceptual vocabulary, then they're going to be similar in content, right? Then you can do different things. You could do a so-called detrended correspondence analysis plot. So this gives you basically a map of the field in terms of the most important indicator words that you find. And we're going to see that plot in a bit. And then we also did, and that was separate from everything else, a simple network analysis of co-authorships, just to see how fragmented is the field or how collaborative is the field. And is there a certain authorship networks that sort of like stand apart? And as per qualitative analysis, we pretty much had to do, that's just an algorithm, right? So once that algorithm comes up with the clusters, you still have to read all the papers, obviously, and you still need to find the common denominator in all the clusters, right? That's something the algorithm really can't tell you. You need to find that out based on your own reading. We also categorized all the papers, whether they were empirical, conceptual, or a review. That's based on work by Julius Ratkins, one of the co-authors. Original policy proposal or just a reference, that was one criterion. So did it make an original proposal or not? And we actually, if there was a proposal discussed or even made, then we extracted it and categorized it, whether it was monetary or distributional. Okay, so quite the game plan. So what were the results? This is said DCA plot, right? So what this shows you is basically the clusters color-coded and how similar or dissimilar they are, right? Just let's ignore the scales or the axis for a moment and just take a look at the plot itself. So basically, you see we find 7 different clusters as per color coding. I'm going to talk a little bit about what these clusters are about later. And you see basically 5 clusters are kind of similar. So they're like in the bottom left corner in a sense. And 2 are kind of apart. So this pink one, it's on the top right, and this green one on the bottom right. Those are like a bit apart from the other ones. And what you then usually do once you have this plot, you try to think about, once you looked at the papers and what they actually do, to find the main gradients, right? So you try to find a good axis, so to speak, that sort of like describes what's going on here. And in this case, and this is really something that we find over and over again. So we did this type of analysis for many different fields, many different concepts, for example, ecosystem services back in 2014. And you always find this kind of qualitative, quantitative gradient, right? That's also kind of natural because it's kind of a natural gradient within research, any research. The second gradient is usually a little harder to identify. And here we really ended up with saying, okay, this is more on the individual level and this is more on a societal level, right? And so what do these clusters actually do? So basically, the pink one is one that's really about, and a really novel one, that's about degrowth communication and degrowth perception. You can actually tell this almost by the indicator words here, that it's actually something empirical and it's something quantitative, and it's, yeah, as you see by descriptive, it's somehow descriptive. It describes people's perception if you look at the papers. This green one here is actually, when you look at the papers, and you also could have guessed it from the words, it's actually quantitative modeling, right? And then you have other clusters as well, more qualitative clusters. I think the red one here on the left bottom, we refer to as conceptual foundations, right? So those were really engaging with, what should degrowth be about? What's the underlying philosophy? What are maybe even different possible definitions of degrowth, that kind of stuff. And yeah, the 7 clusters, you can do all that for all the clusters, and you sort of like find the common denominator. So we had one about degrowth, culture, and power, really lots of papers thinking about how degrowth is referring to colonial past, for example, to power relationships, that kind of thing. The quantitative modeling, really a wide range of stuff, but obviously all common element is the use of mathematical or statistical methodology. The limits to growth is also quite a nice one. That's usually talking about, from a very resource limitation perspective, how we cannot go on growing forever, and but very, very focused on resource limitation, basically. So basically the Club of Rome narrative from 1972. That's what we called it, the limits to growth. So you can talk a lot about all these clusters. I won't do that here, but I would just want to give you like a quick gist of what's going on. And in this plot, really, you see how the field sort of developed quantitatively, right? So you see it's really kind of like a small field. I mean, it started small, that's clear. But it really leveled out at 60 plus or maybe 50 papers in recent times. And it's really not much growth going on here. So it's like stabilized around that level of 50 papers per year. And if you look at the fraction of the different clusters, it's really no clear pattern other than actually the quantitative modeling is sort of like going back. So the quantitative modeling is this, let's call it dark green, right? That used to be quite dominant in earlier years. So quite a big share of papers was about quantitative modeling. And now you see this trend that it's sort of like going back in fraction. And all the clusters in recent years have been kind of even, right? For example, the pink one about degrowth perception and communication, that's a relatively new occurrence in the sense of there used to be 1 or 2 papers earlier or some papers earlier, but then no papers anymore. But now it's been sort of like established, and there's a small fraction of papers that's always there on degrowth perception and communication. And generally all the clusters have been represented since 2016. So there is some variability in early years, as you would expect, but now it's kind of like consolidated, and all the clusters are more and more evening out in a sense, usually with the obvious variability in between years. If you look at journals, so where does the discussion take place, you find the usual suspects, I would say, right? I mean, ecological economics is kind of like a no-brainer. That caters to all the clusters. Obviously, there's a slight majority of papers dealing with quantitative modeling, or this cluster we called flavors of degrowth. But it really caters to all the clusters. Journal of Cleaner Production, also sustainability, futures. The only one that's really been new to me, like I hadn't heard of this before I did this analysis, is this capitalism, nature, socialism one. And that's really the one that's really, really philosophical, that we sort of excluded for the qualitative analysis. Those were really hard to read. And really, most of them were written with this utopia scenario in mind. So some of them even were written, the publications in that journal were written apparently with the tacit assumption of some sort of degrowth transition already happened. So it was really, really a special category here. But the other ones, I would say usual suspects, also sustainability science or environmental values. There's lots more, but these are the most common ones. In terms of co-authorship network, this is basically just showing, who's working with whom, and how many people are really isolated, or how many papers have been written really isolated, and how many people are really collaborating. And when you see a plot like this, what's really striking is there's lots of siloed research going on, I would say, lots of small scale collaborations, but there's one big network of collaborations, I would say. And this is really the thing that stands out with that is it's really people who are affiliated or have been associated with Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. I think that's the right way to pronounce it, hopefully. That's really like the Barcelona connection, and that's fine. But for such a young field, such as degrowth, we were kind of surprised to see that there's not more collaboration going on. And really a lot of the research is going on by people publishing alone or just with one co-author. And yeah, that was really unexpected, to be honest. I have another slide in the supplementary materials if you're interested, but let's just leave it at that for the moment. Let's talk about policy proposals in general, right? So what's going on here? So basically, one can say that lots of proposals, the majority of research does not discuss any policies. That was kind of interesting to us, obviously, but unexpected. There's lots of proposal discussion, and if it's occurring, it's actually by just referencing stuff that's out there. But of those who actually discuss proposals, roughly half actually also develop something, but it's mostly conceptual. And the minority case is really that somebody sort of like develops a proposal and actually backs it up with empirical data. And I think that's something that could be improved, right? Because to me, it's always better to actually have something empirical in the backhand to back up your argument, right? But okay, it's also harder. So that's maybe something. In terms of money and distribution, we can say the following. So we have 16 monetary proposals developed, 33 distributional. And again, the large majority is conceptual. So basically 3/4 is conceptual and not much empirical. The main monetary proposals that have been discussed or developed is basically, the system needs to change in some way based on the monetary growth imperative. So assuming MGI holds, then there needs to be the following changes. Or variants of that's been a common theme. Another frequent theme was alternative or complementary currencies. So maybe local currencies or, just a different monetary system. And in terms of distributional proposals, the hotly or mostly debated topics were things such as minimum guaranteed income, all kinds of taxes, ranging from wealth taxes, taxes on income, so in terms of how it progresses over income levels, that kind of thing, but also international taxes. That's also something that has been discussed. Also interesting, the idea of a maximum income in an economy. So what should the maximum income be, right? And what would be the repercussions of that? And also planned reduction of working hours per worker is something that we found occasionally. So how should work be distributed, basically? Really quickly about the results. You could say so much more, but I want to sort of conclude or wrap up with a few key insights. So basically, on the multivariate analysis, you can say that Konrad Ott, back in 2012, when he looked at degrowth, he said there's 4 variants of degrowth. And we agree based on our analysis here to some extent, because we find some overlap with what Ott is basically saying based on his qualitative analysis. We do have some backup here based on our quantitative analysis, but it's just some overlap. It's not, Ott's picture is not the one that holds up today based on our results. We have the main gradients of the field are basically methodological. So whether something is qualitative or quantitative, and whether something looks at the individual or society. So that would be spatial scale in a sense. I already talked about the conceptual disconnect between some clusters. So in particular clusters 4 and 7. So the fourth one, that was the things on the right, the dark green ones and the pink ones. You can simply tell that if you just go back to the plot. Let's just do that quickly. Oops, sorry. You can simply tell that from the distance of the words here on this plot, right? So for example, if you have a difference of 4 units on one axis means like a complete turnover of indicator words usually. So something that's here will have nothing to do with something that's here, right? So in here is really, there's some overlap between those 5 clusters here. There's actually also a little bit of overlap between the limits to growth one and the quantitative modeling, which is natural, I would say. But there's really no further connection between, the dark green one, the quantitative modeling one, and the rest, and especially not the pink one. So that's the degrowth perception. So those are really sort of like disconnected to the rest based on this analysis. So you can now, you can say a lot about that. I mean, you can argue, okay, maybe that's representative of a schism between heterodoxy and orthodoxy in economics. As some people say, Lawson most notably. I don't know if that's helpful, right, to speak about schisms and heterodoxy versus orthodoxy. Maybe it's more helpful to just talk about problems and possible solutions. But it's an actually debate that's going on in economics. So yeah, it's probably something to it. And another interesting thing is that in another analysis, Drupp et al., they analyzed the field of sustainability economics, and they formulated the hope that formal modeling could be a way to bridge divides between different clusters in a field. And I don't see that here because some of the degrowth literature seems to be pretty much anti-formal modeling, right? Because I don't know, they just seem to reject it. So it seems a bit unrealistic to actually express this hope here. Yeah, another key insight, like I said, there's this relatively recent cluster on degrowth perception and communication, and I think that is really valuable. And there should be more research on that. Some insights on journals and authors, just real quick. You can look at this, right, in follow way. There's usually this distinction between economics journals and non-economics journals, right? Now, if you look at where is the degrowth discourse going on, it's 2/3 of all publications is in non-economics journals. Now, there's different explanations for that, right? So, I mean, it really reflects the interdisciplinary nature of degrowth itself, but possibly also the clash between heterodoxy and orthodoxy again, right? If it's actually published in economics journals, it's actually good, very good, or above average journals as per the recent rankings, right, that are out there. So for example, Ecological Economics, a very good journal. Actually, I think only very few have been above the median if you take a recent ranking. If you look at what clusters had the largest share of economics journals, then it's clusters 3 and 4. So that's, I think, let me just take a look at the paper real quick. The fourth one is actually the quantitative modeling one. So that's kind of natural that there's sort of like a high match with economics journals. I think that's kind of like a natural fit. The third one is the flavors of degrowth, right? So that's the possible variants of degrowth. That's a little bit of a surprise to us. And all other clusters have been well below the 10% mark. So the majority in all other clusters is non-economics journals publications. Another thing is the geographical aspect, because really, I think it stands out that degrowth is really strong in continental Europe, and especially in southern continental Europe, so Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and really marginal everywhere else, almost everywhere else. I mean, there is the occasional American, Canadian, or Australian researcher. There's really nobody in the sample from, I think, an Asian university or an African university. So that's also maybe a problem from a variety or a very diversity standpoint. And there's a modest level of overall collaboration, especially considering the age of the field, of a very young field, basically. And it's really centered around the Barcelona University. So I used to have this slide for policy proposals when I first sort of like talked about it. The reason being that the first sample we had was only until 2019. And until 2019, when we did the first analysis, it was really like that. There was hardly anything. And the good message, or like, yeah, the good message is it's sort of like it's gotten better, but it's still not too much as we've seen, right? So there's, as others have pointed out, there is a certain lack of policy proposals. Another thing that could be critical is that it's really a largely uncritical adoption of the monetary growth imperative. So when you look at the economics literature about that, that's really controversial. And even within some degrowth scholars or scholarship, it's not unanimously accepted. So it's kind of interesting that whenever there's a monetary policy proposal, it's usually taken the MGI for granted, right? Which is actually based on what's going on in the discourse, not something you could be doing or should be doing. Basically, in terms of distribution, just to wrap it up, all those proposals were basically in line with Kate Raworth's idea of a donut economy. Really, there's a lack of concrete policies or action plans in concrete settings. So what should we do in a concrete setting? Not much about that. There's really a strong focus on taxation of income from labor and capital, and for example, not on land rent. And there's relatively few references to Piketty's capital. That's also something that has been really, really even worse when we did the first sample. That was only until 2019. There were really not many references to Piketty, hardly any. That also has picked up, because I think what Piketty is saying, or much of what Piketty is saying, is actually fitting quite well to degrowth. So it's kind of surprising that there's so few references to Piketty. So let's draw a couple of quick conclusions. Yeah, like I said, there's really a lack of concrete policy proposals within the literature sample that we analyzed, at least. The MGI, so the monetary growth imperative, is usually uncritically adopted, and that's potentially problematic. So some suggestions, and there's basically more you could say, but some suggestions would be, I think, or we think the degrowth discourse would really benefit from more focus on policies and their constraints, and also their feasibility in concrete settings. So concrete countries, concrete regions, things like that. Generally, it's all very abstract and also vague. There could also be more focus on wealth and its distribution in any form, steady state or degrowth economy. That's a really interesting topic, and it's pointed out oftentimes, but there could be more focus on concrete realizations of that. Yeah, And then there's this general point of, yeah, we have lots of theoretical concepts, a lot of theoretical developments, and not so much empirical research. So research that actually looks at data and confronts, the theories with the data. And then the last point, I think it would really benefit the degrowth discourse if there were more research on degrowth perception and communication. So it's a bit like with risk, which is my main research topic, basically, right? There's lots of theories about what you should do facing an uncertain future. That's one thing. But then the other thing is how people actually perceive risk, right? And it may be totally different. And the same thing might be true here. So it's actually quite different, quite interesting, or would be quite interesting how people actually think and reason about, degrowth as a concept, certain degrowth policy proposals. And this would also probably make communication much easier, right? And also probably what I should say here, there should be more focus on non-Western samples, right? A frequent problem in research. But I think it would be good if we also would be more inclusive in that regard. Okay, I think I've gotten a little over time, but I thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, hope to have a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Oliver. That was wonderful. So now we'll just open it up for some questions and comments if there's anybody. First would be AJ Sutter. So go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering why you chose the sample that you did of papers apparently in English, because there was actually a gigantic fluorescence of work on this field in French already by 2008. So, for example, your tiny little column with just green and blue, there is so much more stuff in French by 2008 in many different areas, especially conceptual foundations. You had Latouche's main book in 2007. You had Gorta's Ecologica also in 2007. You had tons and tons of stuff, hundreds of authors. Also, the idea that there was no definition of degrowth until Hickel in 2021 is contrary to what a major French dictionary, the Grand Robert, says. They found one in 1974, and it has exactly the elements of environment, economic growth, and inequality already established. And this is even, you can find it even, here is my, I don't know how well this reads forward or backwards, but this is my 2013 edition of the Petit Robert. So this is a mainstream dictionary college kids use even, and it has exactly that definition of décroissance. A couple of years earlier, it did not. So it showed that by 2013, it was already very, very well established. The Grand Robert is more authoritative, but it just really kind of distorts your conclusions, I think, a little bit by the restricted linguistic realm. I think if you included French, which unfortunately the Barcelona school, who's done a lot of great work, they have sort of elided the whole French contribution to this field. But if you included French sources and also books, not just academic articles, you would find very different distributions for some of your charts.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment. I think these points are valid. I mean, I had to actually, I was reminded of to my high school days when you showed the Petit Robert. Thanks for that. That's nice. So Yeah, sure. I mean, you can, with this bibliometric kind of analysis, you can always make criticisms of the kind that you did. For example, why didn't you use other languages, right? That's totally true. Well, there's one pragmatic answer. Well, you have to make a cutoff somewhere, right? And as
Yeah,
I
but
said,
French degrowth
yeah,
itself is a calque from the French word.
yeah. In
Okay,
the,
France is
I
the
know, I know, I know.
Mamelution,
Can
as we
can
say
we
in
let him
Yiddish.
answer, please?
Yeah.
So in the paper, actually, we talk about that, right? We talk about décroissance and we talk about degrowth. And to us, it's actually a bit of a different discourse because what I got, and I didn't read all the French books and stuff. And also, your question about books. I mean, I answered that question in the presentation when I said, well, you could always include books. That's true. But when you look at the publication culture in economics, it's really peer-reviewed publications that count. So I mean, that's also a decision you can criticize, obviously. But at least in the universities I know, this is like the gold standard. So write a paper about it, write it in a highly acclaimed or publish it in a highly acclaimed journal, and you're good to go. But obviously, you could draw a wider frame, right? And décroissance, we actually distinguish that from degrowth because I think it's actually a different kind of line of thinking. So we distinguished it as being closer to ecological economics in Dali's sense, also very closely related to steady-state economics. And décroissance really, and this is in line with Martinez Ayer and colleagues, is more of a, I don't know, eco-socialist program in a sense. So it's more of a political, I don't know, it's also more anti-economics. That's what basically that we took out from reading a lot of papers, including some of what you just mentioned. So it's basically, it basically says, okay, economics is something that should be abolished, right? And so we delineated décroissance from degrowth. And if you want to look at the exact argument, you can look at the paper. So we actually know that there's décroissance, and the exact literal translation is degrowth. But we think it's a slightly different tradition from what we wanted to look at.
We have a comment online from Carrie King. One reason that there might be few references to Piketty is that some people working in stock flow consistent modeling, the usual framework for anyone doing heterodox ecological or ed growth, don't think Piketty's conclusion is theoretically correct. I don't fully understand the argument, but have heard it a few times.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've heard it a few times as well. Also blunt claims such as Piketty's book's just not good, and things like that. I don't know. I wouldn't go as far, but I mean, to me, it's just it seems like a missed out opportunity, right? If there's like a mainstream economist giving you arguments for basically your agenda, and you're not using it as much as you could. So to me, that was always striking. But as I said, this has picked up a bit in the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay, yeah. Next is Tim Foxon.
Hi, Thanks, Oliver. Thanks for a very interesting talk. It's Tim Foxon from University of Sussex in the UK and European Society of Ecological Economics. I want to ask about this sort of lack of focus on monetary policy in the degrowth literature, and I think you mentioned right at the end of the paper, probably because it was just outside your cutoff, this very interesting paper by Olk, Schneider, and Hickel on modern monetary theory for degrowth transition. That seems to be a very interesting example of two things. One, it's relevant to public policy debates around investment and government debt and so on, but also that it links degrowth with other areas of heterodox economics. And And maybe that's, again, something that maybe the degrowth literature hasn't done enough of linking and with other areas of heterodox economics, which are sort of complementary to the core areas of degrowth and ecological economics. So that might be an example of where, you know, it's good to look for that type of synergies.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Exactly like you said, this paper by Olg is just outside the cutoff date, basically, but it's one very good example of what would be needed, right, and what would be good. And I think there's more to come. And it's also this real project, I think, again at University of Barcelona, which actually looks at degrowth policies and their implementations, apparently. So it's not that it's completely out of focus of anyone. It's just, I don't know, just picking up, apparently, right? So, and you're right. Sometimes it's also this people want to belong to a tribe thing, right? And I had this strong feeling when reading some of the papers that there was really a strong interest in separating oneself from those other people doing, for example, ecological macroeconomics, right? Simply because they were doing mathematical modeling, right? And that's maybe maybe that's detrimental, I think. But there seems to be this schism, you know, of people not wanting to use formal modeling. I don't know why. And it's certainly not helping. I mean, that's for sure.
Great, thanks.
Are there other questions or comments? I have one while we wait. Regarding the, you know, one of your comments was the lack of policy, I guess, conclusions or recommendations. You know, having read all these papers, why do you think that is? And, you know, how do we go about making that transformation? Because I think that's really the important piece, and, you know, it's missing. So how do you think we go about that?
Yeah, well, I myself am not a degrowth researcher per se, so this is like my easy exit. But I mean, basically, we're interested in transformation, right? And degrowth could be one way to transform to a sustainable society. I mean, that's for sure. And I think what's really promising, really, and that's like a development of the last couple of years, like our analysis has shown, is this research branch about perception and communication, right? I mean, there's lots of theorizing, brilliant, some maybe not so easy to follow. Lots of concepts. It's already gets problematic when you get to the empirical. It's not so good already. So lots of theoretical frameworks, not so much empirical testing. And then we don't really know how people actually, you know, perceive degrowth. And I think that's really the big step, right? Because you need to get in people's heads and you need to know how people think about it, right? And if people somehow, for example, just have a problem with our framing of degrowth, then this would be something that would be a total deal breaker, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if you find that people systematically like something, if you frame it a certain way, then that's also something useful, right? If you're interested in a transformation of some sorts. So I think this whole, I would call it more psychological branch of research is really, really promising, and there should be more of it.
Thanks. There's another comment in the chat. AJ, if you want to read, you know, just ask it yourself. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted. There you go. Nope, we're not hearing you for some reason.
That's why.
There you go.
When Piketty first came out, I had just published a book in Japan about degrowth and its relevance in Japan. And by the way, there are a few other authors here in Japan, but mostly writing in Japanese, or I my manuscript was translated into Japanese. That is why maybe you didn't find them. But I was actually scared when I first read Piketty, even though I thought it was a great book, because he is talking about these two rates, the rate of economic growth and the rate of return on wealth. And he said that it's a very unusual period when G is greater than R, that for most of human history, R is bigger than G. So and tremendous wealth inequality. So you could read his argument, which, by the way, is straight neoclassical growth theory. He goes through all the parameters. It could be interpreted as an argument that we need to maintain G bigger than R to avoid wealth inequality. And that could be read as advocating for more economic growth. So it's not a slam dunk how you would interpret his argument at all, even though he seems like some of his solutions are very progressive, et cetera, and therefore very appealing to the degrowth community.
Yes.
That could be another explanation why people don't refer to Piketty so much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, that's true. I was thinking more about what you said, some of the solutions, right? Like a progressive income tax and stuff like that. I mean, that's totally right up the alley of degrowth. So, I mean, if it's there, why not use it? But you're totally right. I mean, his whole framing is totally a neoclassic standard theory. So, yeah, that may be a good reason. Yes. Still don't understand why you wouldn't use it, though, if it's out there. You know, but okay, that's maybe a question of style. I don't know.
All right, Alejandro has a question, so go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation. I just was, thinking about the slide where you present the networks. Is that networks of co-authors or chains of citations? And whatever your response is this something, a curiosity that arises out of your research, or it somehow influenced the analysis that you did?
Well, it augments the analysis in a sense that I've actually never seen this done. So the question, who collaborates with whom, it's not about citations, it's about who collaborates with whom and on how many papers. So I thought it was interesting to just look at how fragmented or connected a field is. And then you can actually use, you can quantify this network. There's different measures to quantify that. And then you can compare it to other fields that are, similar in age. And then you find that there's actually quite little collaboration in comparison. And it's actually, from the numbers, it's more like an older field, right? So that you have this, that's one takeaway, but that's, I think, quite interesting. And I don't know why that is. And the other one is basically, this finding that this Universitat Autónoma Barcelona is really actually dominating the discourse, at least when you look at collaborations and also citation-wise. It's really quite dominant. And everything else is basically, I wouldn't say marginal per se, but really, the periphery. So, and that's interesting, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, concerning that point, you just mentioned that most likely both networks of collaboration and chains of citation correlate in the case of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I have no doubt that that's the case. But perhaps everybody knows that there is a kind of awareness raising today about the bad incentives we actually face in academia and how this is producing the phenomenon of article publication communes, where there are a lot of free writing, people signing without making a substantial contribution. So I would actually rather look at chains of citation, although there is also the issue of citation cartels. But I have the impression that chains of citations would say something more legitimate about the importance of a group of academics than networks of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe for future investigations. I don't know. Julius is also here. So Julius did this type of analysis. Maybe he wants to say something. There he is. To this question. Is there something I missed, Julius?
Oh, not at all. I just found it odd because I've done co-author network analysis before, and what you usually see is different clusters of different schools of thought. So we have two ways, and we did two ways. We analyzed quantitatively the words, the conceptual words that are used, and we analyzed quantitatively who's collaborating with whom, co-authorships. And usually you have different clusters, as we can see by the word analysis. But we don't really see another cluster apart from the Barcelona group. And I find that quite interesting. I mean, we can interpret it differently, but certainly we can say they're dominating the field. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but everything else is very scattered. Single authors, double authors. But then we have people from Barcelona really citation-wise, but in this plot, co-author-wise, really influencing the whole discourse.
Thanks.
We have time for just one more. Allison, you put something in the chat, so why don't you go ahead?
Good morning, everybody. Hey, I loved your question, Alejandro. And it was a great pre-thought to what I was thinking. Do you think there is value, Oliver, in groups like the International Society for Ecological Economics and our regional chapter, the UC, to help bridge these collaborators? And how can we ultimately create more connections? You know, regardless of language barriers and cultural barriers. I mean, it's interesting listening to AJ, and, you know, he's obviously really well versed in the French series. I don't speak French. I don't read French. So there's no way that I could know those, like, do you know what I mean? Or, just more approachable, and everybody's not fighting.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think there is value in these groups, definitely. I want to share one anecdote though. So there is a joint conference of the European Society for Ecological Economics and the Degrowth. Let's call it Degrowth Society. I don't know. So it's the Easy Degrowth Conference this year. And they have this open peer review for the proposals that you submit, right? And apparently, so my proposal didn't have anything to do with degrowth. And that was fine with one of the reviewers, but the other one was actually pointing out, well, this is not about degrowth. So, and I'm like, okay, so is it a joint conference or not, right? So this was a bit weird. And it's really counterintuitive because, I mean, that's just not inclusive behavior. You know what I mean? I guess.
Well, it seems really myopic. It seems very like single focus when we talk about degrowth and a lot of these theories. We actually have to be more expansive in our thoughts, right? Like we have to think about how degrowth affects so many different situations and so many different groups of people. And yeah, I would agree that, you know, they should have invited you or had you come.
I mean, I was invited, but it was just weird to see this reviewer report, right, in a conference that's actually about ecological economics and not just about degrowth. So somebody misunderstood something, apparently. But I think there's ultimate value in coming together and talking to each other, no matter what the flavor. So, yes.
And I will piggyback on that answer for just my little 2 bits as the current president of U.S. Society. One of the things that's bothered me with ecological economics, that's my degree, is the schisms that have occurred and the break-off groups that have occurred. I personally believe we find strength in coming together, debating our arguments, making each other stronger. And these little silos I don't think help any of us. And if we're going to truly make a difference, I believe we really need to come together as a group and stop the siloing effects. My little 2 bits. But Oliver, any last comments that you'd like to make?
No, thank you very much for these very interesting, very constructive questions. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And I'm really, really sorry. I seem to have forgotten Julius on my introductory slide. So, but now you're here. So he's also a co-author. So he joined late and he did the co-author analysis. So it's good you were here, Julius. I'm terribly sorry.
Well, thank you, Oliver, for the presentation. It was wonderful. We had a great discussion and really look forward to seeing more from you, and can't thank you enough for taking time today. So thank you very much, and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And hopefully everybody can participate in our next couple of events again in the chat. And with that, we'll say thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you all again.